Next will be the scripture reading from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 13 through 22. Now, who will harm you if you are eager to do what is good? But even if you do suffer for doing what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear, and do not be intimidated, but in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an account of the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and reverence. Keep your conscience clear, so that when you are maligned, those who abuse you for your good conduct in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which also he went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison, whom in former times did not obey, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were saved through water. And baptism, which is prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him.
One, two, three, four, five, six, 7. In case you ever wondered, this pulpit goes 7 screws up the file. Weird, huh? You ready for another preacher secret? I know it's only been a couple of weeks since I gave you the last one, but I'm feeling generous this morning. And besides, the Guild of Marginally Ethical Preachers, or GOMEP as they're known, hasn't hunted me down to punish me for the last ones that I've given you, so here we go. This is preacher secret number 86. The best way to keep your people in line is to make sure they feel like they're not good enough. Good enough for what? Good enough for anything. So here's an example. Hey there, loyal parishioner. Do you set aside time every day for prayer and devotions? Yes? Okay. But for how long? 15 minutes? Pfft, come on. You can do better than that. You should be, at minimum, clocking in 30 minutes a day. So what time do you do this? Oh, the afternoon? During your lunch break? That's cute. If you were really serious about your spiritual growth, you would get up at 4:30 in the morning and clock in 90 minutes. See? Never, ever let people think that they're doing enough. Otherwise, you'll lose control of your flock, and they'll start doing things like skipping Sunday morning worship and things like that. Never let things get so loosey-goosey that folks start feeling good about the way they practice their faith. Now, if you think I'm exaggerating, you don't watch enough televangelists. And no, just because we're on YouTube and Facebook Live doesn't mean I'm one. So put that to rest. Now, probably the most widespread misunderstanding of the Christian faith, or at least what it means to be a Christian, is that everything hinges on being good, whatever that means. It's all about improving our behavior and conforming to a particular set of standards. And to complicate matters, the belief that it's also, the belief is also forcing others to conform to be good too. And that's when things get messy and you end up with things like the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition and the Salem witch trials and various other blights on the history of Christianity. When the result of following Jesus is imposing our moral standards on the rest of the world by policing and punishing bad behavior, something is wrong. We're missing the point. And let's just be clear. This is true for many religious systems in the world, not just Christianity. Last September, a young Iranian woman named Masha Amini died in police custody after being arrested for violating her country's Islamic dress code. Many religions in this world are guilty of violent, repressive, moral crusading. Boys and girls, this is why religious nationalism is bad, always. Just saying. So here's something that may sound strange at first, but the call to follow Jesus is not a call to be good. In fact, if it has anything to do with being good, it's a call to give up trying to be good. But we humans don't always get it, do we? This understanding that following Jesus equals being good is so widespread that it's almost regarded as common knowledge. And that's when the average person says, oh yeah, of course that's what Christianity is all about. That's common knowledge, right? And one of the problems with what we think is common knowledge is that it colors the way we read the rest of the Bible, even when something in the Bible challenges what we believe to be common knowledge. So here's an example. John, Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 15. Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Okay. And then later in verse 21, he says, they who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me. And so there you have it. If you want to follow Jesus, then you'd better buckle down, grit your teeth, and obey those commandments. Presumably all of them, not just the big 10, but the 613 tertiary ones that go along with it, like don't eat shrimp or don't play football or all that stuff. Common knowledge, right? Sounds like the foundation of a solid moral code that has a strict focus on being good. But is this really what Jesus was trying to communicate? See, it doesn't say that if you love Jesus, you need to prove it by working hard to keep the commandments. It says that if you love Jesus, then keeping the commandments is something that will happen without much effort at all. In other places in the Bible, when Jesus is asked to sum up the commandments that matter most, he says it all comes down to this: love God, love one another, even your enemies. And for good measure, he says that everything else in the law and the prophets points to this. And it all comes down to two things: love God and love one another. Now the trouble is that under the influence of this sneaky little common knowledge matrix that we've invented, love just becomes one more thing that we have to buckle down, grit our teeth, and try really, really hard to do. It just becomes one more standard to try to reach, or one more measure of whether we're being good enough or not, which means, of course, one more thing to fail at and to feel guilty about. We'll go over some preacher secrets about that on another day. But that doesn't sound like love at all, does it? The truth is that the capacity to love is not something that we can make happen just with some grit and effort. It's a gift. And this is a gift that we receive as we experience receiving love. It's when we experience the transforming power of being loved deep down in our bones. So when we receive the gift of love, we are better able to share it. Loving doesn't even seem like a risk when we know we are loved. We can love in return without feeling rejected. It is so painfully entertaining to watch teenagers fall in love for the first time. When this happens, the teenager sends their friends out on reconnaissance missions to learn how another person feels about them before taking the risk to approach that person themselves. So if the intel report indicates that the other person does like you, then suddenly it becomes a whole lot safer for you to approach that person yourself. However, if your intel specialist fails to get any information, it remains terrifying. So knowing that we are loved is a wonderful gift that makes us feel ready to take on the world. When we know we are deeply and totally loved just for who we are and regardless of anything we do, we then find ourselves giving out love to those around us. We can give ourselves with reckless abandon because we don't have to hoard love or desperately cling to love because it keeps coming to us perpetually. And of course, if we are loving in generous and bold ways, and love is the sum of the commandments, then being good is going to take care of itself as love flows freely. Now, this doesn't mean that you won't get hurt. No one who follows Jesus and sees where he has gone could be under any illusion that there is no pain on the pathway that he's taken. But those who know that no amount of pain or rejection or even violence can separate them from the love of God are much more able to stand firm when the forces of hostility and hatred try to do their worst. Our reading from 1 Peter today that Gary read even spoke of the likelihood of such suffering and called on us not to fear and not to be intimidated, but rather to stand firm in the hope that is in us. Now, getting back to our common knowledge issue, hope is often seen as just another one of those things that we have to grit our teeth and try really hard at. Either that or we think of it as nothing more than just wishful thinking. The kind of hope that Peter's talking about here is not like wishful thinking at all, nor is it something that we have to try hard to generate. Hope is a gift too, just like love. Hope is a gift. Hope is the spirit in which you are able to face the future when you know what's coming to you and you know that it's wonderful. Hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is the confidence of a person who knows that even though they're still a prisoner at the moment, their release has already been secured. The hope that Peter talks about here is the confidence of knowing that Christ has already defeated the forces of hostility and death. We're not vaguely wishing that he might. We know he already has, even if the news of his victory hasn't reached everybody yet. We know that it's because he continues to live and to love freely and generously, even though humanity did its best to destroy him. We, humanity, sought to snuff out his love and hope by putting him in a place where we thought all love and hope were extinguished. A place of utter rejection and humiliation and shame and death. Now, society always has someone that it's turned its back on and cast into this place. It's what we do when we are anxiously trying to prove that we're good. We label someone else as evil so that it's clear that the evil is in them, not in us. And we cast them into this horrible place of utter rejection. But Jesus stepped up and allowed us to cast him into that place where we feared the most, that place of utter annihilation. And then he shocked us all by emerging 3 days later, scarred, yes, but more alive than ever. And if anything, even more full to overflowing with love and mercy and grace than before. He is risen. You're paying attention. Good, good. Also in our reading, Peter describes Christ as having descended to the dead only to proclaim the good news to the prisoners there. It was the same good news that he had been preaching all along. Release of the captives, release of the prisoners, and then emerging into new life. He compared it to like Noah emerging from the ark. And so now, that place that we feared so much has been exposed as having no real power other than the power that fear gave it. Jesus has shown that it is not so lethal after all. He calls us to follow him, to know ourselves, to be loved, and to boldly live as he lived and love as he loved. Knowing that the worst that can possibly happen to us has already been shown to be perfectly survivable and not in the least bit capable of removing us from either the love of God or the life in God. And because of that, Jesus is not in the least bit interested in us trying to be good. I'll say that again. Jesus is not in the least bit interested in us trying to be good. Because most human attempts to try to make ourselves look good usually end up labeling somebody else as bad, right? Labeling somebody else, and if they are evil, if they are bad, then we must be the good ones and therefore safe. Except that didn't work out for Jesus. He died at the hands of those who labeled him the bad guy because he dared to say that the sum of all the law and prophets is love God and love your neighbors. Jesus, the most perfect embodiment of love that the world has ever seen, died at the hands of the ones who were sure they were the good guys, thus proving this whole goodness project was a miserable failure. Trying to define and secure goodness for ourselves always ends up destroying love itself. The point Peter's trying to make here is that Jesus wants us to follow him into that kind of love and hope that is a gift from God. One that's unearned, one that is undeserved, but freely given and totally transforming. And we will follow the crucified and risen Christ into that promised land where goodness will take care of itself and be born again as love and love and more love.